Hello and welcome back to the Warwick F1 show. This week we are obviously looking at the Austrian Grand Prix that took place over the last weekend. A very good race. Something not many moments that stand out, but just good, clean racing throughout the grid. We'll obviously be talking about, I guess, the flashpoint of the weekend right at the start with Russell and Perez colliding. Who was at fault? Did Russell deserve his 5-second penalty? We'll also be talking about track limits. Obviously, a debate that was rumbling on throughout the weekend. Obviously, Perez falling back to 13th for the sprint race start due to having his laps deleted after the session. Obviously, multiple penalties being given out during the race for track limits breaches. We'll also be talking, are Ferrari back in it? Obviously, Charles Leclerc winning the race at the weekend with Carlos Sainz looking good for a second place finish until he retired with an engine failure that was quite monumental in scale. Obviously, I can't do this on my own. So as ever, I'm joined by my co-host, Chinmay. How are you doing, Chinmay?
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, penalties galore. Literally, that's Austria in a nutshell. Just like over a read, where literally everyone gets a penalty. That's literally what it was this weekend. But otherwise, yeah pretty good race.
As ever, what would you give the race out of 10 for, I guess, overall?
I'll probably give it an 8 out of 10. I dock the points made just because there's just so many penalties this weekend. It's so difficult to figure out which one was where. And yeah, but considering there's also a sprint weekend as well, both races were pretty good. So I'll definitely give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, and we are also joined by Kavin once again. How are you doing, Kavin?
I'm doing as good as you can in this heat. It's a bit awful, but the race was, I think, quite good. The last two races have really shown off, like the 2022 cars, how they can go wheel to wheel and race. I think the race was quite predictable, but like there's a lot of entertainment through either midfield battle and whatnot. So yeah, I give it an 8 out of 10 as well.
Yeah, and we'll dive straight into it, obviously, and we'll start with the penalties. Obviously, a big part of this season has been allegations of inconsistency from the race directors in particular. We saw last week in Silverstone probably penalties not being given out when maybe they should have. Obviously, we think towards Perez against Leclerc and Hamilton and Verstappen against Mick Schumacher. But here, they are a lot more strict, especially with the track limits. I mean, Chinmay, what do you think of that? Do you think they should be more strict, or do you think that they were possibly being a bit overly harsh with the stewarding this week?
I think, especially with track limits, they've been perfectly fine with it. I think what they should have been as strict as they've been in Austria as they should have been in Silverstone, especially with track limits to gain an advantage. I feel it's good that they are really enforcing it this weekend. But like I said, the biggest problem this year has really been the inconsistency. You just don't know when a certain thing is going to be given a penalty and when it isn't. So I feel that's just like the biggest problem with the stewarding this year, I guess, especially with two different race directors and having two different sets of opinions. But like I said, it was good that we're being very strict on Austria, and that's how strict they should have been in Silverstone as well.
Yeah, I mean, Kavin, do you agree that they do need to be strict? Obviously, we did see last week they were probably being a bit less strict than I think maybe some people were expecting, and this week maybe a bit more strict than some people were expecting. Do you think they need to be strict, or do you think that a bit more leniency should be given?
I think there should be a bit more leniency because I think some cases where drivers were losing time by going wide, they were still getting penalised. Like I think Vettel got his lap time deleted even though he lost time. I think in the past in Austria, it's actually been quite fun when drivers go off the track and actually a lot of the time they get punctures or suspension damage and they get like the natural punishment for that. I think there should be some policing, but I don't feel there should be the same penalty for going off the track that is like taking another driver out of the race. I mean, both just get 5-second penalties. I think there needs to be a spread of like different penalties you can get.
Yeah. And obviously, Chinmay, it does seem to be something that normally comes up at Austria. I remember the show we did last year on the Austrian Grand Prix was very discussing penalties. Obviously, Perez being given, I think it was Perez either being given penalties or not being given, or the driver who forced him off the track being given a penalty for obviously forcing him off the track. Do you think that Austria in particular has characteristics that sort of mean this penalty debate is going to come up. And I'm thinking especially with the gravel traps that are on some of the biggest overtaking zones on the track.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, especially because when you're forcing somebody off the track, because there's not like Silverstone where in Austria, the gravel tracks are literally right next to the actual asphalt itself. So when you're pushing somebody off the track, you're pretty much ruining. It's a very high chance you're going to be ruining that person's race and whatnot. So I feel that penalties is a really good way of really just sort of like balancing it out. So if you ruin somebody else's race, it's only fair that your race gets just as ruined as well because you ruin that person's race, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, Kavin, do you prefer it? The Austria, I guess, out of a lot of the tracks on the calendar is a lot more unforgiving. You can't really go around the outside at turn 4, and we'll move on to it in a second with obviously the Perez-Russell incident on lap 1. Do you prefer that unforgiving nature as opposed to like tracks like the one we're coming up to, Paul Ricard in France, where it's basically just a flat layer of asphalt? Do you think that the gravel traps are better and should be brought into, I guess, more circuits?
Yeah, I do think so, especially when you're making it like your own mistake. You're going off into the gravel. I mean, it punishes people during qualifying, especially. But in the race, I think I like turn 4. That's like a really good spot for overtaking. And I think it just stops many drivers from going around the outside because it'll just be forced wide. So I think that's a bit of a balance in there. I mean, there should be gravel around the circuit, but I don't think in overtaking spots, because that's just going to like limit overtaking.
Yeah. And as I was mentioning before, we had probably the biggest incident of the weekend with Perez and Russell colliding. Obviously, Perez trying to go round the outside of Russell at turn 4, trying to make up that position. Russell collides with him, forces him into a spin, obviously into the gravel, and Perez retires a few laps later, obviously losing a load of time from the hole in his side pod. Do you think the 5-second penalty was fair, Chinmay?
I think definitely. I think by that time Perez was a bit ahead in the corner, and I mean whether Perez gave enough space, I haven't seen the incident enough to really tell because I didn't actually watch the race live, but I feel that especially with what I've seen, Russell giving 5 penalties is justified because especially it was Perez ahead by the end of that corner and Russell did understeer slightly off the curb to hit Perez, and eventually that ruined Perez's race entirely, made him retire. So, for us, only it's quite justified, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, Kavin, do you agree? Do you think a 5-second penalty for Russell was fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair, but if he didn't get a penalty, I wouldn't have been too bothered by it because I think into the corner entry, I think Perez kind of squeezed him a bit onto the curb, which then led to him obviously like going wide and taking him out. I looked at that incident compared to the Vettel-Gasly one later in the race, and Vettel definitely left a lot more room at the corner entry. But I think Russell, it was also a mistake from him. He just did oversteer a bit and take him out. But I think for Perez, he could have definitely been more compromising there, just for the sake of his own race as well.
Yeah. I mean, do you think, I guess the question for both of you, do you think Perez just needed to be a bit more careful? Obviously, he's got a much faster car than George Russell at the moment. He could have probably got past a few laps later, and then it would have been a battle at the front between the 2 Ferraris and the 2 Red Bulls. Do you think that maybe he should have just taken a lap or 2 longer, especially with the risk on the outside of turn 4? And we saw it 2 years ago, obviously, with Alex Albon and Lewis Hamilton, and what was basically a carbon copy of the incident. So, Chinmay, do you think Perez did need to be a bit more careful? Probably could have held back, and then that just in the end cost him.
I mean, he could have, but then the advantage is that Perez did have that extra pace, and he did seem to have that grip to go around the outside. And I think if he did leave about a meter extra, and it was just a bit unfortunate, George got a little bit of understeer from the because of the curb. But I feel you can argue both ways that Perez, at least with Perez, if he made the move stick in that time where he unfortunately didn't stick, if it did, then it could have been more beneficial and the fight could have been commenced even earlier on. Whereas if Perez did stay behind a couple of laps, he might, by that time, the Ferraris and the 2 Ferraris of Verstappen might have had a small gap built up because Georgia at that time was much slower compared to the front runners. So maybe Perez trying to get it earlier on will put him the fight much earlier on as well.
Yeah, I mean, Kavin, do you agree with that, or do you think something a bit different?
Yeah, I think mostly because Russell's a driver with a reputation for clean racing. Like, he definitely wouldn't have expected to have a collision there. I think if you're going around the outside of, say, like Magnussen, I don't think he would have done that. But yeah, I think I agree with what Chinmay said. Like, I think the Mercedes is a pretty quick car, so I wouldn't be surprised if he got stuck behind for like the entire first stint. So yeah, I think you shouldn't say he can't make a move there. But if you compare it to the incident last year with Norris, like this one was much more 50-50, I feel, compared to that one. I mean, in that one, I think Norris just intentionally didn't give him room. Also, in this one, Russell was sort of forced onto the curb and understeered and locked up and hit him. So, yeah. A bit of a racing incident, but...
Yeah. And I want to bring it in with the Norris and Perez incident last year as well. And basically, talk about something that could have ended up happening in the... Obviously, with the gravel traps, which you've spoken about a few minutes ago, there is much higher risk that the driver that goes off onto a gravel trap is going to lose a lot more positions than if they go off onto asphalt. The FIA has always said that they are judging an incident not based on the consequences, but on the incident itself. Chinmay, do you agree? Do you think that they are? Because obviously we see stuff like this with if there's a gravel trap, especially in Austria at turn 4, you're going to lose 3-4 positions running over the gravel. But go back to Silverstone, for example, if you're Max Verstappen and obviously Mick Schumacher forced off onto asphalt, you're going to lose like a second or two at max. Do you think that is part of the FIA's decision making on penalties, regardless of whether they say they're not actually looking at the consequences?
Yeah, definitely, because it doesn't matter if they say they're not looking at the consequences, not prioritizing it. The consequences takes a big factor, and a consequence is a big factor of the incident itself. Was like, what did the incident cause? Because if you're forcing somebody onto gravel, chances are you're ruining the race, or even like you're causing the car to get beached, and you're going to finish the race for that driver immediately already. So, whereas on asphalt, there's much less of a risk of that because you're not going to be stuck as much compared to gravel, obviously. So I think definitely very much the consequences are being taken into action.
Yeah. And I mean, Kavin, do you think that the consequences should be taken into account, or do you think it should just be black and white? This is a driver's forced another driver off the track, therefore 5-second penalty, regardless of what happened to either, let's say, Mick Schumacher last week in Silverstone or Sergio Perez this week in Austria?
Yeah, I think the consequence should be taken into action because it also makes an effect on the intent. So say if you want to push a driver off the track into the gravel, I mean, they're going to lose quite a few places when you're doing it. So I think that's just a bit of ill intent from a driver. So it should be penalised more. At the same time, it's a bit like retribution because obviously the driver which has been affected is losing a lot more time. So it's not really fair if you take a 5-second penalty and come out way ahead of them, even though you've ruined their race. So, but there has to be a bit of a balance because sometimes, it's just luck of the draw whether somebody gets really badly affected or not. So, yeah, that was the incident with Hamilton and Silverstone last year with Verstappen. Everyone was arguing that it should be disqualified or something because Verstappen ended up in hospital. But I don't think it was that different to many incidents. I think it was not that dissimilar to the Turn 4 incident last weekend. Obviously, at a much lower speed, but
yeah. And do you think, Chinmay, that can maybe account for some of the perceived inconsistency in the stewards' decision? If they just came out and said, "We know what we've said before, but we are actually taking the consequences of the incident into account," that can explain why it seems like some weekends there is so much more gotten away with, like last week in Silverstone, where it's all mostly asphalt, as opposed to this week where it's a lot more gravel, and therefore the incidents have a lot more effect and therefore are likely to be treated a lot more harshly.
Yeah, I would say that as well. I just feel like the FIA the race directions just needs to be a bit more specific on whether they say they need to be a bit more stricter or a bit a bit more lenient because of the incident. Maybe the guidance might need to be altered very slightly because of the sort of runoffs. Because, like I said, you can't. It's not really fair to do the have the same amount of strictness whether you're going to Silverstone or Paul Ricard, because where you got million-mile runoff areas, or compared to Austria or even Spa or some the traditional tracks where there's literally gravel tracks, so you got no margin for error whatsoever. So I feel like it's just the FI needs to be a lot more. They need to be a lot more coherent and communicate better to the drivers and the teams of what they're actually stewarding compared to they're just being a lucky dip for the teams.
Yeah, I mean, Kavin, do you agree with that? Obviously, we are going to Paul Ricard next weekend, so you'd imagine that we might see a few incidents that would have been punishable in Austria, not punished there, and this might be the reason why.
I think it all goes back to the end of last year when with Verstappen and Hamilton, obviously there was that incident in Brazil where Verstappen definitely went off the track and pushed him off, but he didn't get a penalty. And that's fair enough because Verstappen did that again in Jeddah because, he wasn't going to get a penalty for it for consistency reasons. So I think everything went to that point, and what they needed to do before the season was to put out a statement and tell the exact rules of racing, how they're going to penalise them. Because at the moment it's still a bit all over the place. They need to say if you're behind at the apex, then you're not entitled to room or something. They need to be more specific on their ruling so you can make consistent decisions. Because there's different groups of race stewards each weekend, so it's going to be going up to their opinions.
Yeah, and it did seem the drivers are starting to get more and more frustrated with this lack of consistency, lack of knowledge about what they can and can't do. Sebastian Vettel fined for walking out of the drivers' meeting, I think, fed up with sort of not getting on with it and having to consistently discuss how the stewards are going to deal with each weekend. Chinmay, I guess what solution do you see? Obviously, we've got two race directors now. We've got obviously, or as always, a different team of driver stewards at every race. Do you think something needs to be changed? Do you think we just need a core band of driver stewards who will always deal with the incidents in the same way? And do you think maybe having two race directors wasn't the correct decision, and that one race director can be good enough, but just maybe needed to perform a bit better than I think Michael Massey was at the end of last year?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I see the reasons why F1 tries to avoid having a single team of stewards to try and avoid biasness, but in a way, the biasness you would have by having a single core team of stewards is actually better than what we're seeing right now, because at least with a biases, you kind of know what to expect when it comes to penalties. Whereas, especially like we've seen in the last few races, certain moves you'll see where a driver is forcing somebody off the track. Certain races you'll see will definitely get a 5-second penalty. Some will not get a penalty at all. And I can see how frustrating it can be, especially for the drivers. I mean, probably Sebastian Vettel might be the most vocal person against it. You saw that he stormed off the meeting when trying to discuss about all the stuff, which caused him his suspended fine. But yeah, I think a single team is just a lot more effective and just a lot more coherent and cohesive.
Yeah. I mean, Kavin, do you agree with that? Do you think they do just need one team of driver stewards just going around every week looking at these decisions just to bring in that consistency?
Yeah, if there isn't a clearer rule book for which the stewards can pick up on, then they just need the same stewards each week for the consistency. Because I think the stewards should just be a background part of the race weekend. Now it's every weekend they're the topic of discussion. And I think some drivers like Vettel and Alonso are getting really annoyed at what's happening. Alonso's been taking the pits recently. In a couple of races ago in qualifying, he went down the escape tunnel for no reason, and it caused yellow flags. And he knew he wasn't going to get penalised for that, so he was going to take advantage of this really incompetent and inconsistent refereeing.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see, obviously, where that goes from here. We'll move on to the actual race action right now, and obviously we'll talk, as ever, about the battle at the front, a battle for the first time in a while that seemed like Ferrari was winning. Because obviously, Chinmay, if we run through the race, Ferrari seemed to always have the measure of Red Bull, especially obviously on Sunday when it really mattered. It seemed like they were going to get a 1-2 victory right until almost at the end when Carlos Sainz's engine blew up. Do you think that just a bit of bad luck that obviously Ferrari seem to be combining with their own poor strategy at the moment? Or do you think that maybe there's something could have been done?
I mean, in terms of what could have been done at that moment, I don't think it's not really. Unless at the beginning, obviously Ferrari need to make sure they don't need to minimize these sort of engine issues again. But it's just like whenever something's always going wrong for Ferrari every single week. We've had strategy blunders, and then when there isn't one, there's going to be an incident between the drivers, or like we just saw on Sunday with Carlos Sainz. Having to undergo Plan E, which is the whole engine explosion thing. But yeah, just especially for Sainz, it's like any time he's starting to grab some momentum this year, it's just been destroyed by some poor luck from his side, or maybe it's just some silly mistake. So hopefully, if Carlos Sainz can really get some luck on this side now, then Ferrari can really challenge for the Constructors' Championship and maybe even Drivers' Champion if Leclerc has better weekends like this and not get ruined by his own team.
Yeah. And Kavin, do you think at the moment with Ferrari, they've now publicly said that there's no number one driver, they're free to race? I guess, first off, do you think that's the correct decision? And second off, we sort of saw that in the sprint race, obviously on Saturday, before finding out that Leclerc was tyre saving, so was naturally going to be a bit slow. Why do you think there was just no communication there, that Sainz was trying to overtake Leclerc? And I guess, going back to the previous question, should there be a number one driver at Ferrari?
Yeah, I just think the environment of Ferrari is quite toxic, because after Sainz won in Silverstone, there was barely any Ferrari people on the pit wall celebrating. Seems to be they're not communicating the two garages between Sainz and Leclerc, which is kind of what you need for a team which is going to the top. I'm sure Red Bull, the Verstappen and Perez sides are both communicating. I think at this point you can't really say Sainz has to be the number two, because he's not that far behind Leclerc in the championship. It's not. I think it's about 30 points or something. I think for Ferrari, the best chance it would be put Sainz as the number two. But I don't think he's going to be taking that much points off Leclerc. He wasn't going to be doing this weekend either. But just the small stuff like the sprint race, there should just be better communication between the pit walls of what they're doing.
Yeah, and obviously we saw that Sainz engine blow up. One of the most dramatic engine blow-ups we've seen in a long time. Do you think maybe the marshalling needed to be a bit better? Because obviously the car kept rolling back as Sainz was trying to get out of it. He'd go back in, put his foot on the brake, try and get out again. The car would roll back. It was seemingly quite chaotic, especially as the flames were getting closer and closer to him. I mean, Chinmay, what could have been done to maybe improve the situation, improve, I guess, driver safety as well? Or do you think it was just the hill? Do you think other factors maybe just had just a bit of an unfortunate result? Unfortunately, everyone got out safe.
Yeah, I think I'm not really sure, because like I said, I mean, they had that hill, the rock car was rolling back, so it's becoming much more difficult for Sainz to get out the car, especially when he needed to get out that quickly, especially with how quickly the fire starts spreading on the back of the car. But maybe it was... I'm not really sure, to be honest, because you got the marshals first, they've got to get their extinguishers and run over to the actual car itself. Then they've also got to be dealing with the VSC and the rest of the cars and make sure they're all safe as well. But then it's, like I said, it's not a perfect process. So, and the FIs will definitely learn from this anyway. So I just can't really think of anything that could have been done different at the time being, knowing the current infrastructure of the stewarding.
Yeah, I mean, Kavin, do you think the same? Do you think any improvements could have been done, or do you think that it was sort of just an unfortunate incident that fortunately turned out well?
Yeah, I don't think I can blame any of those marshals. But I saw something on social media that apparently there's a really good photo of Sainz in like flames.
Yeah.
Apparently that photographer was getting in the way of all the marshals. And I saw that post by a marshal apparently on Reddit, I think it was. And he was saying that, it was a really difficult process to stop the car going down the hill and fire extinguishers. So I don't know. I think it was just like a lot of factors at once.
Yeah. Obviously, we got to remember the flames are likely to be very hot. Obviously, the marshals have to get close to try and slow down the car. With Ferrari seemingly back in it this race, do you have more hopes for the championship, Chinmay? Obviously, we've seen for the last few races, maybe Silverstone, Ferrari, maybe even Ferrari were still the second team behind Verstappen. But Verstappen definitely coming off second best to Leclerc, obviously finishing second, and probably would have been overtaken by Sainz if he had finished the race. Obviously, Sainz probably cruising up, passing him just before the car blew up. Do you think that there is more to be hoped for from this season, or do you think this race was maybe just a one-off?
I'm seriously hoping it's as the starting of a resurgence for Ferrari, but I'm not going to get on the hype train just yet because it's still Ferrari at the end of the day, and they've had resurgences back in 2018. I want to use 2018 as an example, and there's times where, like they took this win at Silverstone, but then come Germany off from after Hockenheim, the entire campaign was dead by then. So I'm hoping, but I'm just expecting Red Bull to run away in the second half of the season because I just don't have the faith in Ferrari to really not mess up.
Yeah. I mean, Kavin, do you think Ferrari can overcome, I guess, the flaws they've had for the past few races? Obviously, this is Leclerc's first time on the podium since Miami, his first time winning since all the way back in Australia. Do you think that this can be the start of something new? Maybe they've got over their rough patch, which I think most teams seem to have at some point throughout the season. Do you think that they've done that now and that they can strive on? Or do you think that it was one race, maybe a bit of a positive blip in a consistent pattern of downwards form?
I think on balance throughout the season, I think they've had the faster car than Red Bull even. I mean, it's just been strategic mistakes mostly and some reliability problems. But I think going forward, I think, they have the advantage over Red Bull. I think Verstappen's doing a really good job just to even, make the car seem as better than it actually is. But yeah, Sainz seems to be back on form compared to back to his form last season. I mean, I think they were the faster car in Canada as well. Sainz could have won that race. He won the race in Silverstone. Leclerc should have won 2 last weekend. So it's going pretty positively for that. But, Ferrari's strategy always seems to fail them in some way. Red Bull, they're just perfect at executing pit stops and strategy and whatnot. So, yeah, Ferrari going to have to be in the top game. But I think there's a chance for that, for sure.
Yeah. And I will take fault for saying in the chat about 20 minutes before the car blew up, it's just like, how are Ferrari going to mess this up now? And then Sainz's engine blew up about 10 laps later. I was like, it should not have said that. But we'll move on to another driver that sort of had a bit of a resurgence. Obviously, third podium in a row now. Lewis Hamilton back on the podium once again. And obviously, with George Russell coming back to finish finish fourth, even on the road, continuing his streak of when he finishing in the top 5. Do you think that Hamilton and Russell, they've sort of been kept apart by just sort of circumstances, situations? Do you think now they may be getting closer together in the points and maybe even closer together on the track? We'll start seeing sparks fly, especially as Hamilton's form seems to have returned for him.
Yeah, maybe. Things can happen. We could have another Hamilton Rosberg coming up, but like I said, we haven't actually probably seen an on-track battle between these two. Even though their forms are very, very close, their pace seem to be very, very similar to each other, which is just a matter of time until we actually see what's going to happen with the on-track battles. Well, that's probably the more intriguing driver pair to watch out so far this year.
Yeah, and obviously, Kavin, we've seen that Mercedes have made improvements. Obviously, last week at Silverstone, Lewis Hamilton probably coming in with a genuine chance of winning at some points in that race. And there are rumours that they'll bring more upgrades to the French Grand Prix that could be worth up to half a second in lap time. Do you think that Mercedes are very, very nearly back? Obviously, we saw in Austrian qualifying, they were up there until they both obviously crashed, that they were aiming for maybe even P2 on the grid. As I was saying, do you think Mercedes are almost back? Do you think they're almost back to being top three?
I think they're already back. I think the race paces for them has always been stronger than the qualifying pace this season. And of course, both drivers, I don't think, had the best weekend last time out. Obviously, they both crashed in qualifying. Hamilton had a pretty bad sprint race, and Russell, of course, had to change his front wing and have a penalty. But yeah, I think they're thereabouts. I don't think their pace was that far off Red Bull actually, and what Verstappen was doing in the main race for Sunday. And yeah, I don't think that track was. They said it wasn't going to be their best one for this weekend, and even when they were dominating, I think Verstappen took a couple of wins there, 2018, 2019. So it's never been the best one for them. I think France. I think it's going to be like the true test of if Mercedes are going to be a factor in the fight. And I think we all want Mercedes to be there because it's just entertaining seeing your driver battle Lewis Hamilton. Let's hope they'll start winning some races soon.
Yeah, and obviously that was an aspect of Lewis Hamilton's, weekend, especially with the Haas's, who have also seemed to fly back up the grid. Obviously, Mick Schumacher getting his second consecutive points finish in P6. That Hamilton seemed to, especially in the sprint race, maybe less so in the main race, struggle to get past the Haas's. Do you think that he is maybe struggling with, obviously, being at the front for so long, for almost up to from 2014 to 2021, basically being in a front-running car all the time? Do you think he is maybe struggling a bit with having to actually battle people, and that now he has more experience of it, he's been there, he's done that over the last few races, that's where maybe the form is coming back? He is finding it easier to overtake, and as a result, he is making up those places and then eventually making up those podium finishes and points finishes as well.
Yeah, maybe, but I think I may be wrong with this, but I think because of his qualifying crash on Friday, I believe he may have got a new chassis on Saturday before the sprint race. So I think Saturday may be an example of just him not just being very conservative, because if you notice, he wasn't being very aggressive against the Haas's this weekend. And I think that maybe because he's got a new chassis, maybe just trying to get used to it again, because yes, it's pretty much the same spec, same car, but every chassis is different, and especially with Formula One, there'll be minute differences, and you had to kind of get used to that. But then I think also Lewis Hamilton, there's not much for him at stake this year. He knows he's not fighting for wins, he's not fighting for the championship. Mercedes are pretty much guaranteed at least third in the Constructors' Championship, and he's going to be guaranteed at least fifth or sixth. And he knows Russell's all the way up front on Saturday, and then obviously on Sunday he was already way back anyway, so Lewis just didn't need to take any risks. So I don't think it was Lewis Hamilton struggling. I think it's just him being conservative and just playing the right games, to be honest.
Yeah, and that is the thing, maybe, Kavin. Obviously, when he got up into third and was quite a solid third, do you think maybe he didn't want to show the true pace of the Mercedes? Because obviously, if you keep your cards close to your chest and then bounce out with an incredible car, maybe even next week in Paul Ricard, then your rivals are going to be shocked. And I guess once he's in third, he's 25 seconds behind Leclerc, Sainz and Verstappen. He's at least 10, 15 seconds ahead of Ocon, who was in fifth. Do you think he was just driving a lonely race, just having a Sunday drive, and then eventually managed to secure third place?
Yeah, I think he likes to do that. He always, when there's nothing at stake, he tries going as slow as possible and just complaining about something, playing some mind games or whatever. Because he didn't finish that far ahead of Russell, even though Russell went down to 90. So I think he was definitely conserving the final stint. There were some really quick laps here and there, but then he would go a second lap slower the next one. So yeah, I think he's not showing his true hand. But also on the sprint race, I think it's a problem for him at the moment. Him acclimatizing into the sort of midfield again. especially the start of the sprint race in the first lap. He just kept getting mugged by different drivers. Like, he's just definitely not as late as possible on the brakes as he could be. He's just being a bit too cautious, I feel like. There's definitely lots of opportunities to pass Schumacher. I think Perez took the first opportunity to get past Schumacher because he's obviously experienced in this area of the field. Well, Hamilton, he's just braking too early. I think he's losing quite a few positions. When he starts a bit further back, he just seemed to fall down a bit to 10th, 11th, then had to recover it. So, but I think they'll be back to the front soon, as long as he doesn't crash in qualifying again. So it should not be a major issue from going forward.
Yeah, and obviously, hopefully, for all the Mercedes fans, they do get back up to the front. We'll talk about the midfield for a bit. A team that sort of have come back a long way from where they've been for the last few races. Obviously, scoring both scoring points in Silverstone and doing very, very well in Austria was Haas. I mean, Chinmay, are you surprised at how quickly Haas have sort of climbed back up the grid? Obviously, we saw them near the front at the start of the season. They sort of dropped back a bit to, I guess, the lower portion of the midfield during the sort of middle, middle first half of the season. But now they seem to be back. Obviously, Mick Schumacher in 6th, Kevin Magnussen in 8th. Are you surprised at how quickly they sort of climbed back up the grid?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, Haas have always had a history of they just go, some weekends they're just great, they're fantastic, they're pretty much best of the rest, and the other weeks they're just dismal and they're just slow, especially when they were in their first few years when they were really competitive with, and I think 2018 was probably their main one. But I think especially, just talking about the drivers as well, it's good to see that good to see the drivers at least starting to get some form with Haas, and Haas now climbing up. I think they're now 7th in the Constructors' Championship, which is nice to see as well. I think other than last year, because of the whole Urakali Nikita Mazepin thing, I won't lie, I'm a bit of a secret Haas fan, but the thing is they always won the smaller teams, and the smaller teams you've always wanted to do well. I was always out there with when Force India did well as well. Not so much with Racing Point because I'm not really a big fan of the Strolls, to be honest. But actually, for a side note, nice to see Mick Schumacher have a little bit of a villain mode at the end of the Saturday sprint. It's pretty good, pretty awkward, pretty abnormal to see in the interviews, but it's good to see Schumacher getting some points now. Hopefully he can keep it up.
Yeah, I mean, Kavin, we've seen obviously last week Schumacher getting his first points, this week finishing 6th, his best result in his F1 career. We've seen previously in lower Formula, Schumacher's sort of had that one result and then has kicked on from that and has done really, really well after that. Do you think we're seeing that now? Do you think this is last week was his sort of coming of age, I guess, race, and now he's sort of going to perform at his level? Maybe challenge Kevin Magnussen a bit more than probably he had been doing for the first half of the season.
Yeah, I think he's quite a confident driver. It's weird because, he's a Schumacher, but I don't think he's got that raw talent. But what he does have is he needs to take a bit of time to get a feel for the car. And he's got really good racecraft. And in F2, I don't think he was ever the fastest driver. But each weekend, he was just maximizing what he could. And over the course of the season, that was enough to win in the championship. I think we're finally seeing that. He was inch perfect in the sprint race in terms of his defense against Hamilton. He placed the car perfectly at each corner. I think we're finally seeing the true Mick Schumacher. And he may not be a future F1 champion. I think he's showing he's good enough to be on the Formula 1 grid. Also with Haas, I think, it's weird to say, but I think they're a bit incompetent in the garage because every season they seem to just randomly unlock some pace. And they haven't upgraded the car whatsoever. But they just seem to not be sure how to set up the car each weekend. So there's so much potential in that car, but I don't think they've fully unlocked it. And if they bring some upgrades, they could be doing some serious business. And I think the whole midfield situation is really fluid. At the moment, AlphaTauri are the slowest car. But a few weekends ago in Baku, I think both cars qualified in the top 10. Gasly finished 5th or something. So I can't count your chickens before they've hatched or something. Because I don't know, it's changing again and again. So Haas, if they don't make the upgrade soon enough, they might fall back down.
Yeah, and obviously another team that had a very good race was Alpine. Ocon with a very, it's one of those races that he does really well, but it's a really boring doing really well.
Yeah,
he was sort of just there, managed to get 5th place. Unfortunately, not being able to hold off George Russell right at the end. Fernando Alonso coming from 20th, having an issue with the pit stop, having to pit again, but still managing to finish 10th. Do you think that Alonso had how do you think that Alonso is maybe the most unlucky driver on the grid at the moment? Because obviously he's saying he's performing at 2012 levels, that he could be on 90, 80, 90 odd points, which would put him around Lewis Hamilton's level of points scored. Do you think that Alonso is getting unlucky? And do you think that this week was another example of that?
I mean, he was literally stranded because of an electrical issue that his car would not stand. So literally just looked like the Alpine mechanics didn't get his car ready in time for the sprint. I mean, he's just been plagued with issue after issue for so long now. But his form says anything otherwise. I mean, just look at the lap where he crashed in Australia, where, I mean, that was a bit more where his steering just failed on the last corner. But he could have got himself on the front row, and then there's other weekends, I can't remember which ones exactly, but there's times where he could have literally been in the top 5, where he was even better than Esteban Ocon, at least when it looks like with single lap pace. So, and then the Alpine engine decides it just doesn't want to help Alonso in any way. So, yeah, I'll definitely say he's the most unlucky driver right now.
Yeah, and I mean, Kavin, do you think that if they manage to sort out Alonso's luck, if Ocon keeps performing, that they'll be able to really solidify their probably spot as the 4th best team on the grid? Because it really looks like at the moment that Alpine probably are the do have the 4th fastest car on the grid.
Yeah, I think they brought some upgrades to Austria, I think, and it's working out really well for them. They've got. I think the main strength for them is they've got 2 really good drivers compared to the rest of the midfield teams. I think Alfa Romeo may have a car at a similar level, but it's a bit inconsistent. Bottas is the only driver, and he's only the same level as Ocon. So to have Fernando Alonso there is massive for them. But I do think he's exaggerating a bit when he says being as good as 2012. He said that when he's in McLaren, he said that every race is the best race of my career when he finished 14. So I don't know. I think he's not been that far ahead of Ocon. I mean, in qualifying, I think Alonso looks really good, but in a lot of races this season, I don't think he's been driven like he put in 2012, 2014, where he just had an incredible start and just maximized everything. But he's been really unlucky so far this season. Hopefully his luck improves a bit, and I think we'll be seeing him finish probably around 7th in the championship if that happens.
Yeah, and we'll talk about one more team quickly, specifically one driver, and this brings us to also some news. Like obviously F1 silly season is in full effect at the moment, and that is McLaren. Obviously Lando Norris fairly secure at the team. I think did he score points at this race?
Yeah, he finished 6th.
Yeah,
it was a double points finish.
Yeah,
is it a double points finish for McLaren?
Yeah, McLaren got a double points finish.
I thought they did. I thought they didn't do as well as they probably looks like they did. But...
Yeah, Lando got 7th, Ricciardo got 9th.
Yeah. Yes. So with the McLarens both finishing, probably brings off the pressure a bit on their other driver, Daniel Ricciardo. Obviously, Colton Herta tested today or a few days ago, as you're listening to this, with McLaren in Portimao. There have been rumblings that Ricciardo could be replaced by Albon, Vettel, Herta, O'Ward. There's a lot of drivers that sort of seem to be maybe in the battle for his seat. I mean, Chinmay, do you think that this, I guess, Austrian performance finishing 9th could alleviate some of the pressure? And I guess, do you think that Ricciardo will be on the grid in 2023?
I'll be honest, I don't think it really does, because ninth place is he was still considerably behind Lando Norris. And Norris definitely had some reliability issues during this weekend. I mean, especially if you look at Friday qualifying, he had literal brake issues. Whereas I don't think so Ricciardo had issues, but Ricciardo didn't make it out Q1, whereas Lando still did. So, and the fact, I mean, to be honest, I still see Ricciardo, he may still stay in 2023 because his contract still allows him to, and I don't think McLaren are as, they'll be a bit more loyal to the contracts than other teams, which, I mean, Aston Martin. At least they'll be more reliable than Aston Martin with their contracts. So, but yeah, Ricciardo, I don't see him. There's a good. I wouldn't be surprised if he does get dropped at the end of the season because his performances this year have been nowhere near Lando's still, and I don't see it improving. But definitely by the end of 2023, I think Ricciardo's had it. As much as he's nice, one of the nicest guys, he's had it.
Yeah, I mean, Kavin, do you agree? Obviously, it seems like ever since Ricciardo joined McLaren, he's struggled, obviously, with the weird exception of that Italian race last year, where the one race he performs, he's ended up on the top step of the podium. I mean, do you think that Ricciardo will stay for next year? And I guess if not, who do you think will replace him?
I don't think he's going to stay. I think it's going to be down to him, especially. He's a good driver. He's joined McLaren looking for a world championship. That's never going to happen now. I mean, even if they get a top car, Lando Norris will win. And he's looking at his own pride, and I feel like he doesn't want to be at a team who don't want him to be there. I think it's going to be increasingly obvious with Zach Brown talking about how he hasn't measured up to expectations, that they're not really happy with his performances and whatnot. And it doesn't seem to be getting any better because, again, in Austria, I mean, he was still considerably behind Norris, who had an old engine as well. So, yeah, I think he would probably go. And I saw on BBC that, who are really reliable, of course, that McLaren are interested in Albon and Sebastian Vettel for next season. I don't think Herta would be a particularly good choice. I mean, he's 11th, I think, in IndyCar. He'd basically be a rookie, and I wouldn't do that for sure. I saw links with Ted Kravitz said links with Oscar Piastri. Apparently, McLaren want to sign him on a permanent deal away from Alpine. I think that would be a fantastic move. But yeah, I think Vettel could be a really inspired one because I don't think Aston Martin are less competitive than McLaren.
Sure. Sorry.
But I'm surprised about Gasly. He signed again for another year at AlphaTauri. I felt this would be the perfect team to join McLaren. He's been consistently sort of 10th best driver on the grid. I'd say he's been better than Albon. I'm surprised. That felt like a no-brainer to me. But there's still quite a few options. I think a lot of these will be better than what Ricciardo was doing.
Yeah. I was just literally going to say that. I think you've probably just look at the frustrations Vettel's been having the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's had enough patience. He's run out of patience with Aston Martin now, because that's the main reason why I don't like the Strolls very much, because they're all math, no trousers, pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to wait and see, obviously, where Ricciardo ends up going. And I think that brings us to the end of our Austrian Grand Prix review. Any other drivers either of you want to mention?
I'd probably mention AlphaTauri, Gasly and Tsunoda. I think what's happening, they're in a really bad state at the moment. Especially, I think they only confirmed Gasly for next season, right? They still haven't confirmed Tsunoda. But yeah, he's been really poor the last few races. He crashed out in Canada himself, took his team out in Silverstone, and last race he finished last, I think. So yeah, he's getting really lucky that Yuri Vips has had the scandal that he's having, and Liam Lawson's been pretty poor as well. But I think his seat isn't fully comfortable at the moment.
Okay. Any other drivers you want to mention, Chinmay?
Not really. I think we mentioned all of them, to be honest. There's not really any other stand-up performances than who we've mentioned so far.
Yeah. And I guess we'll now move on to our predictions and obviously our preview for the French Grand Prix. Right. So yeah, now we are moving on to our predictions for the French Grand Prix that's coming up, and obviously our preview of the French Grand Prix. French Grand Prix has not been one that many people have looked forward to. We had a decent race last year, obviously with Verstappen managing to make an extra pit stop and overtake Lewis Hamilton right at the end. But other than that, Chinmay, the French Grand Prix has never really been one that many people have looked forward to.
No. It's I'm just trying to think of a nice way to say it, but I just really don't like the track at all. I just do not like that track at all. First of all, you've got a 1,000,000-mile runoff average, which is fair enough. I don't mind the tarmac runoffs, but the track is just boring. And it's overhyped.
Yeah, Kavin, especially with the amount of layouts they can do. There's 150 odd layouts that they could do, and they somehow managed to pick one that's really, really dull. I mean, what would you maybe change about the track that was possible, obviously, with the layouts that were there?
I think the biggest issue is just the runoff and the colouring. I don't know why. It just makes the whole race look so drab. But I think actually there is some okay racing here. It's not like it's terrible. You can overtake, pass. It's just a bit mediocre. I mean, last year gave us a good racing. There was a lot of overtakes up and down the field. But if there isn't good racing, at least you've got some nice views and some circuits like Baku and Monaco, whatever. This is just you just want to gouge your eyes out. So
it literally does make your eyes go funny. It literally does.
Well, obviously, maybe the 2022 regulations will help out with the racing, and we are going to move on to our prediction now. But first, obviously, we need to look at our Austrian Grand Prix predictions. Chinmay, they were decent this week, weren't they?
They weren't too bad. To be honest. I mean, you were having a 4-point lead, 37-33.
There we go.
And you do, and spoiler alert, you do extend that lead. Because in terms of our podiums, you predicted a Verstappen, Leclerc, and Hamilton. So
just one more severe throttle issue, and that would have been perfect.
Yeah, and I had a Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc. Unfortunately, thank you to George Russell for ruining it. So
that was 5 points to me and 2 points to you. I think if I'm right.
Yep. And then for your three other predictions, where you said that the top 3 teams were all in the top 6, but Perez and Sainz retired.
Yeah, once again, George Russell and Ferrari engines ruined that.
Yeah, you said that all 4 Red Bull cars are in the points. Unfortunately, AlphaTauri had a dismal weekend.
Yep, and we got one. There was 1 out of 4, not even 2.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah. And you had 6 or more DNFs. We literally had half of that, 3. Sainz, Latifi, and Perez were the DNFs.
Oh. I mean, it's weird. You see 2 top teams and then Lord Latifi.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Well, at least Latifi beat Perez, that means, because he retired later. So
yes.
And
what did you go for your 3?
I had Magnussen qualifies in the top 8. I forgot it was a sprint weekend, but I meant a conventional qualifying, but I think he was 6th or 7th or something.
Yeah, so that's a point to you.
Yep. I'm just double checking. Yeah. No, he was 6th actually in the conventional quali. And then he was 7th in the sprint, and then obviously a 9th and an 8th in the actual race. I said there will be at least 3 safety cars. I think there was just a VSC and that's it.
Yeah.
And then the third one, I was thank you to Fernando Alonso. The one time the only time I haven't actually liked it this year was he ruined my 7 different constructors in the points on Sunday.
Yeah, because you were it was 1 lap away from, because Bottas would have taken that final point. Alfa Romeo would have scored points, but unfortunately there were only 6 in the top 10. And what have we gone for our French Grand Prix predictions? Chinmay, do you want to start with your podium?
Okay. I think knowing France, I believe, I can't remember exactly, but I think, if I remember correctly, this is a pretty high deck circuit. So, and also, big France is going to be hot because I think France is a month later than it normally is this year. Because normally it's around mid-June around my birthdays. That's why I remember. But yeah, but I'm expecting it to be pretty hot, so high deg. And going off Austria, I'm going to be very optimistic with Ferrari and go for Leclerc, Sainz, and Verstappen.
Ooh, I think that could be a decent one. I've gone exceptionally optimistic, and I'm trying to will it into existence with a Hamilton, Leclerc, and Sainz podium. I genuinely, if it's not as hot but still high deg, Mercedes have very good like low degradation. And it seems like we saw that in Silverstone. Hamilton was able to run about 15 laps longer than even the Ferraris. Obviously, in Austria, he was still able to run quite a way. I think it could happen, especially if that Mercedes is a bit quicker. I mean, Kavin, what do you think? Any of those likely to come true, or do you think we're just talking out of thin air?
Verstappen. Did you mention Verstappen?
I haven't got Verstappen on my podium.
What about you, Chinmay? Did you have
I put Verstappen third, but
third, right? I think you're sleeping on this guy. I mean, he's had a couple of weekends. I mean, he would have won Silverstone either way if he didn't have the damage. Yeah, I think Verstappen was going to win. I'm going to say a balance block for Red Bull. I think it's going to be a 1-2 finish for them.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think Sainz there. I think Leclerc, yeah. He doesn't get joy for long. It might come back down to...
No, it's going to be Ferrari master plan in France now that I've said Ferrari 1-2. But...
Yeah, but they haven't actually had a 1-2 since Bahrain, which is a crazy stat when you look at it. Because obviously, when you don't finish on the podium for about 6 or 7 races, it's quite difficult. What have you gone for your top 3, or for your 3-point, 1, 2, and 3-point prediction?
I mean, my 1 point will be a sort of general consensus, but I've actually gone Merc updates don't work.
Okay. We'll have to work that out in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
I think that'll just be I'll just say it's more of a consensus type thing. The second one, my second is going to, I'll say my second and third are fairly close, but I'll put my 2-pointer as a double Williams Q2.
Ooh.
Because they're bringing in upgrades and stuff at the moment.
Okay.
And my third one is going to be Aston Martin, Alpha Tauri, and Alfa Romeo all do not get points finishes. But
you just taken Austria and sort of reversed the prediction.
Yeah.
Decent. I think. Yeah, Kavin, do you think they're all plausible? I think it's not terrible predictions.
Yeah, I think. I mean, first one's a bit hard to measure, but. Yeah. If they don't make a significant improvement from like Silverstone, Austria, then I give it that one.
Yeah, if we see a Hamilton Grand Slam, then we might not have to give you that. You might not get that point, but obviously we're hoping for that. I'm hoping for that. Please, let's just see a Hamilton Grand Slam. How hard can it be? I've gone for obviously my 1, 2, and 3. I've gone for my 1 point, 2 or less retirements. I think France has never tended to be a high retirement circuit, so I think that's fairly reasonable. I've gone for echoing what I predicted in Britain. All the French drivers this time are in the top 10. How many French? Are there 2 French drivers?
Yeah. Ocon and Gasly.
Yeah. All of the Ocon and Gasly are both going to finish in the top 10. Probably could have just said Ocon and Gasly, thinking about it. For some reason I thought there were more than 2 French drivers on the grid. And for my 3-point, I've said that there is going to be an inter-team collision.
If I did the same, I was going to say that if I had to do one.
Yeah,
I think it's either Ferrari or Mercedes. I don't know why, but I'm feeling like the tension at Ferrari is definitely amping up, and I can see like that could be their next master plan.
Yeah. So any team collides. Obviously, one driver collides with their teammate. I think it potentially could happen. Hopefully they collide and then don't retire, because then I can get my 1 point in as well. But that has been the end of the podcast today. I mean, any final words from my guest, Chinmay?
Nope. Just hoping France isn't as the usual dud it is of race.
Anything else, Kavin, you will say?
No.
There we go. And we will be back in a few weeks, obviously, looking at the French Grand Prix. But I've been your host, Will Kingswood. This has been the Warwick F1 show. And thank you for listening.